Good evening. So when I was in my fellowship up in Dallas, the word immunotherapy wasn't really even in our vocabulary. The only immunotherapy that we had was something called high-dose IL-2. So just to give you a little bit of background on that, IL-2 is a naturally occurring substance known as a cytokine, which basically stimulates and coordinates the activities of the immune system. So it's sort of like a field general that gets the troops ready and then sends them into battle. So typically that's in response to infection, for example, a bacterial infection. And we knew that IL-2 had a significant role in the immune system, but one of the key questions was, could we use the immune system to treat cancer? And so during my fellowship, we were actually giving a synthetic form of IL-2 to try to treat cancer in some patients with melanoma and kidney cancer. But the trouble with the treatment is that it can cause the immune system to actually become hyperactivated and overwhelm the body in something called a cytokine storm. And so because of this, you actually have to give the medication in the ICU so that you can monitor for organ failure. So it's a complicated medication to give. But despite all of the challenges, about 5% of patients on this treatment actually had a complete remission, meaning that all of their visible cancer disappeared. So we knew at that time that the power of the immune system was there, but what we needed was a version of that that would be much safer to give and that would work for a much higher percentage of patients. So in 2010, I came to San Antonio and joined START. And for those of you who aren't familiar with START, it really is an amazing place where patients can get world-class cancer care, but also potentially have the opportunity to enroll in early phase clinical trials and receive potentially cutting-edge new anti-cancer therapies. And within the first couple of years of my joining START, we began to participate in a new wave of immunotherapy studies with a new class of drug known as the PD-1 inhibitors. So PD-1 is a protein receptor on the surface of an immune cell. And this can be bound by a cancer cell. And when that happens, it's a bit like the cancer cell has taken the immune cell hostage and basically taken it out of the game. So it's now off on the sidelines, unable to participate in its normal activities, which is basically going around and finding the bad guys and killing them. But if you give a drug that blocks this interaction, like a PD-1 inhibitor, suddenly the white blood cell is able to be released and is free to roam around and do its normal job. And what you see behind you, let's see. Whoops. I don't know if we can go back. There we go. There we go. So this is a close-up picture of immune cells, specifically T cells, doing exactly that. So they are bound to a cancer cell, and then they're in the process of killing it. So this is what we're after in a patient. Nowadays, PD-1 inhibitors like Keytruda, Opdivo, and others are given all over the world and have really changed the way that we treat cancer. And it's also a little-known fact that the first dose of Keytruda, one of the first PD-1 inhibitors ever given to a patient, was right here in San Antonio at the START Center. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to somebody named Stacy, who I guess you just got a sneak preview of. It's supposed to be a surprise. But I first met Stacy in 2015, and at that time, she had already been dealing with cancer for about 4 years. And she had already been through a lot. She first went through surgery to remove some cancerous lymph nodes, which were determined to be cervical cancer. And she also underwent chemotherapy and radiation after surgery to try to kill any cells that were left behind. But 2 months after completing her radiation, she had a CT scan showing that the cancer had already spread to other cancerous lymph nodes higher up in her abdomen. And so over the next 3 years, she underwent radiation to 3 separate areas of cancerous lymph nodes, as well as multiple different types of chemotherapy as the cancer essentially spread upward through her body. And when I met her in the spring of 2015, the cancer was actively spreading to new lymph nodes in her chest and in her abdomen. But as it turned out, there was an opening on one of the early PD-1 inhibitor clinical trials, and after looking at all of the criteria, we decided that she was eligible, and after careful consideration, she decided to take a leap of faith with us and to enroll on the trial. And after about 2 months of treatment, we were encouraged because there was a CT scan report showing that there was some reduction in the size of these lymph nodes. But by the 4-month mark, she had a CT scan that showed that she too had achieved a complete remission, and all of the cancerous lymph nodes had essentially disappeared. And that's a picture of her sitting in our treatment room. And the icing on the cake was that she didn't really have any major side effects. So we were able to avoid that immune storm that we had seen with previous types of immunotherapy. So that was in 2015, as I mentioned, but more recently in 2019, we at START were able to participate in and complete a clinical trial of 2 drugs in combination, one being Keytruda, one of the PD-1 inhibitors, along with a second drug called Lenvima. And it turned out that this combination was particularly potent against stage 4 endometrial cancer, also known as uterine cancer. And the data were, in fact, so compelling that the US FDA, along with regulatory authorities in Canada and Australia, simultaneously approved this new combination treatment for women in those 3 countries. And this was the first such collaboration among these 3 nations that had ever occurred. And so that was very exciting. Furthermore, this was the first new treatment for endometrial cancer since 1970. So despite all of our medical advances that we've had, it had been almost 50 years since there had been a new treatment for stage 4 endometrial cancer. And I think as we move forward, it's critical that we continue our efforts to test as many of these new therapies as we possibly can so that we can, as quickly as we can, find out which drugs work and for which patients, so that hopefully we can one day eradicate this disease. And if anybody is wondering how Stacy's doing, I'm happy to report that she's doing well, almost 5 years later, and she remains on treatment, and she's actually here with me tonight. So she's here with her husband, and over the past 5 years, she's been able to retire as a teacher and do some traveling with her husband and just enjoy her life. And I want to thank her for being here tonight and also thank her for the gift that she gave all of us by participating in a clinical trial. Thank you very much.